The hull panel behind berth 7 had been making a soft clicking sound for 3 days. Ward figured it was a loose bracket. It was always a loose bracket in that section. He pulled his toolkit from his belt, wedged himself into the crawl space between the inner and outer hull walls, and shone his light at the problem. The problem had violet eyes. It was about the size of a large cat, coiled on top of his spare torque wrench, with golden green scales that caught the light like oil on water. Its wings, small, folded tight, tipped in deep purple, were tucked flat against its back. It had eaten a significant portion of the thermal foam lining the wall beside it. It looked at him with total calm, like a creature that had decided this was its space, and was simply waiting for him to understand that. Ward stared. The creature stared back. "You ate my foam," Ward said. "It was unpleasant," the creature said. "But the ship was cold." Ward hit his head on the bracket above him. He did not do this on purpose. It took him 3 full seconds to process the fact that the small golden-green animal in his maintenance crawl space had just spoken standard. Accented, precise, with the kind of diction that made Ward feel like he had never properly learned his own language. But standard, without question. "You talk," he said. "I do," it said. "You fix things. That's my job." "I know. I have watched you for 11 days. It shifted slightly, adjusting its position on his torque wrench with the ease of something that had claimed a throne. "You are careful. You do not cut corners. You fix the seal on airlock for even though no one told you to. 40 people sleep safer and do not know your name." Ward had no idea what to say to that. He said, "Who are you?" "My name in my language," it said. "You cannot say. Your mouth does not make that shape." A pause. "You may choose a name for me. I will consider it." Ward looked at her, and somehow he already knew it was her, the way you know some things without knowing why, and thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. "Syria," he said. She considered this for 11 seconds. He counted. Then, "Acceptable. What are you?" "Dracovar." She said it simply, like it explained everything. He would later learn that it did. "And what does that mean?" "It means," she said, "that I have chosen you. You belong to me now. You may continue your job. I will supervise." Ward opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I have to report this." "You may try." He did try. He went to the bridge, still holding his toolkit, and told Captain Dara Osei that there was a creature living in the hull. Captain Osei, who was in the middle of 3 simultaneous navigation checks, asked him to describe the creature. He described it. She looked up slowly. Then the creature in question walked onto the bridge by herself, sneezed once from the recycled air, and set fire to the edge of the navigation console. It was a small fire. It lasted 2 seconds. The console survived. The smell did not leave for a week. Syria looked at the blackened edge with what appeared to be mild regret. "Apologies," she said. "The air quality here is poor." Captain Osei stared at her, then at Ward, then back at Syria. Then she called for Shom. Shom was the ship's alien liaison, a Valori, which meant he had a soft, broad body, 8 working limbs, and 12 patches of color-shifting skin across his upper mantle that expressed his emotional state the way a human face might. All 12 patches went pale white when he saw Syria. Every single one. He pulled Ward into the corridor so fast Ward's toolkit rattled. "Where did you find that?" Shom said. It was not really a question. "Crawl space behind berth 7. "She found you," Shom corrected. "She chose you." His patches were cycling between white and a pale, stunned blue. "Ward, that is a Dracovar. They are gone. They have been gone for 200 years. She seems fine." "She is not fine. She is the last one, and she is tethered to you. And do you understand what that means?" He did not wait for Ward to answer. 17 civilizations consider a Dracovar bonding sacred. Ancient Accord law, old law, before the current charter, grants any tethered pair protected status. You are now, technically, under interstellar protection that predates the current Galactic Accord by 400 years. Ward looked back through the doorway. Syria had climbed onto the navigation console and was now watching the star charts scroll past with focused attention. Nobody had asked her to stop. Nobody had quite figured out how. "I'm a pipe fixer," Ward said. "You were," said Shom, and his patches had gone a very unhappy green. That night, Ward lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling. Syria had refused the cargo bay, the med bay, and the crew lounge. She had walked into his quarters, examined every corner with systematic precision, and then settled on his chest with her wings folded and her head tucked under her chin. "You know I'm nobody," Ward said to the ceiling. "I fix pipes. I patch seals. I'm not important." Syria opened one eye. "You fixed a seal no one asked you to fix," she said. "For 40 people who do not know your face. That is not nobody. That is the only kind of somebody worth choosing." She closed her eye again. "Sleep. I will guard." Ward did not feel reassured. He felt, somehow, less alone than he had in years. He slept. Valori Station Tren hull smelled like engine coolant, and something Ward could not identify, but suspected was alien ambition. It was a trade hub, the kind of place where 40 species moved money and cargo and information around each other in a dance that looked like chaos but followed very strict, unwritten rules. Syria walked through it on Ward's shoulder and watched everything. She was bigger now. 3 months had passed since the crawlspace. She was the size of a greyhound, her golden-green scales brighter, her violet-tipped wings folded with the practiced ease of someone who had decided folding them was a courtesy she offered and could rescind. She had also developed opinions. About food, about air quality, about the general character of species she had not yet met. She shared these opinions with Ward in a low, continuous commentary that he had stopped trying to argue with after the second week. Ward was there to fix a pressure seal in the lower docking ring. Routine. 40-minute job. He had learned, in 3 months, that no job was routine anymore. He was halfway through when he heard the shouting. 3 Garathi dead enforcers, tall, armored, scaled in dark brown, with the kind of mask that made doorframes look like suggestions, had a human merchant pressed against the railing of the upper walkway. The merchant was a small man with a very large amount of fear on his face, and the Garathi were holding him out over the drop with the casual attitude of people who considered this a polite conversation opener. "Don't," Ward said quietly. "I am not doing anything," Sirius said. "You're staring." "I am observing." "You're glowing." She was. A faint gold light came off her scales when she was emotionally engaged. She was very emotionally engaged. Ward set down his wrench and watched her watch the Garathi with the patient focus of a creature deciding whether something counted as a situation yet. The lead enforcer, the one with the most armor and the smallest amount of what Ward would describe as social awareness, looked across the docking ring and saw Syria. He stared. He was a large being who dealt in physical threats for a living, and he had, by Ward's estimate, never felt the specific discomfort of being memorized by something smaller than him before. "What is that creature looking at?" he said. Not to Ward. To the air. Syria answered. "You," she said. Her voice carried without effort, clear over the ambient noise of the docking ring. "I am memorizing your face." Silence. "Why?" the enforcer said. "In case I need it later," Syria said. The enforcer stared at her for 4 more seconds. Then he set the merchant down, said something to his companions in Garathi, and all 3 of them left. Not quickly, but they left. The merchant collapsed against the railing and made a sound like a man who had just remembered how to breathe. Ward helped him to a bench. Station security arrived 7 minutes later, annoyed that by the time they had documentation ready there was nothing to document. Ward was packing his tools when someone stopped beside him. "That was interesting," said the woman. Human, mid-30s, with a military bearing she wore so naturally it had become part of her posture rather than a performance. She had a station observer's badge clipped to her jacket, Lieutenant Bryn Adeyemi, Accord Military Liaison. She was looking at Syria with the expression of someone processing several things at once. "She does that," Ward said. "The staring?" "The memorizing. She says it's polite to know a face before you decide what to do about it." Bryn looked at Ward. "I got a notification 3 months ago. Dracovar bonding event. 1 registered. Somewhere in the outer survey fleet." She paused. "That's you. That's me. My superiors want to know what humanity intends to do about it." Ward finished packing his toolkit and clipped it shut. "I intend to finish the pressure seal and get back before dinner rotation." Bryn watched him for a moment. "You know you could use this. A Dracovar bond is recognized by 17 civilizations. You could walk into rooms you've never been allowed in." "I already walk into the rooms I need to," Ward said. "They just have pipes in them." Syria made a sound from his shoulder that was very close to a laugh. They were almost back to the ship when a Keth diplomatic attaché stepped into their path. The Keth were thin, tall, with 4 arms, and the cultural habit of announcing their intentions before they acted on them, which they considered the height of civilization. This one announced that he was formally requesting a bond transfer for the Dracovar specimen, citing Keth Commercial Statute 7.14, which permitted acquisition of bonded creatures from species of lower cultural standing. Ward said no. The attaché explained the legal framework. Ward said no again. The attaché began the framework again from a different angle. Sirius stepped off Ward's shoulder and landed on the floor in front of the attaché. She was the size of a greyhound, and she had stopped glowing. The absence of light, Ward had learned, was worse than the presence of it. Say the phrase again, she said quietly. Lower status species. I want to hear it again. The attaché did not say the phrase again. He also filed no formal complaint, because filing a formal complaint would have required explaining why a Dracovar, a species with protected status under pre-charter accord law, was being discussed as something that could be purchased. Walking back through the docking gate, Bryn fell in beside them again. She had, apparently, witnessed all of it. She didn't threaten him, Bryn said. It wasn't quite a question. She never does, Ward said. She just asked him to repeat himself. She says the threat is already there. She doesn't have to add to it. Ward glanced at Syria. She says announcing your intentions before you act is only civilized if you intend something civilized. Bryn was quiet for a moment. I think I'm going to be keeping an eye on both of you. You're welcome to, Ward said. I can't promise it'll be interesting. From his shoulder, Sirius said, it will be interesting. She was not wrong. The thing about the unwritten was that nobody wanted to say what it was. They called it signal interference first, then navigational anomaly, then communication blackout in 3 outer systems. Ward heard the words through the ship's general updates and paid them the attention he paid most general updates, which was enough to file and not enough to worry about, until the Resolute was pulled into an emergency Accord fleet and he realized people were actually scared. The summit was held aboard the neutral carrier Accord Cradle Mirvan. 31 species, hundreds of delegates. An agenda that used careful language to describe something Ward, reading between the lines, understood as 3 colony worlds had gone dark. No wreckage, no distress calls, no bodies, just nothing where something had been. Ward was on the Mirvan to maintain the ship's secondary atmospheric processors. He was not supposed to be in the summit chamber. But Syria walked in and sat on the central table, and nobody in a room full of 31 species representatives felt confident enough to ask a Dracovar to leave. Ward sat in the back. He listened. It was bad listening. The Valori hegemony wanted a defensive perimeter along the outer arm. The Garathi Compact wanted it further out, sacrificing the fringe colonies to buy distance. The Keth Collective had a proposal that used phrases like calculated loss tolerance and strategic depopulation threshold, and other words that meant, let some people die so we can decide where to hold the line. There was a map on the main display. The Keth proposal drew a line in red across 4 human-occupied fringe colonies. Combined population, 1.2 million people. The Keth delegate said the loss was unfortunate, but mathematically preferable to risking inter-system worlds. Ward knew the name of one of those colonies. His sister lived there with her husband and their 2 kids. He did not say this. He sat in the back and felt it sit in his chest like a piece of cold metal, and he did not say it. Syria, on the table, turned and looked directly at him. Not at the delegate. Not at the map. At Ward. She held his gaze for 1 second. She knew. He stood up. He did not have a prepared speech. He was a maintenance technician at a summit of galactic powers, and he was standing up because he could not stay sitting. He said, "Are we deciding which of our people die, so yours don't have to?" The room went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when someone says the obvious thing that everyone was carefully not saying. The Keth delegate said that the calculus was unfortunate but necessary. The math supported the proposal. The perimeter had to be drawn somewhere. Ward said he understood the math. He said, "I just wanted to make sure we were all saying it out loud." He sat back down. Syria stood up. She had been still the whole session. Still in the way she was when she was not glowing. That careful, total stillness Ward had learned to recognize as the moment before something changed. She stood on the table in front of 31 species, the size of a greyhound, golden green and violet tipped, and for a moment nobody spoke, because nobody was certain what the correct thing to do was when a Dracovar stood up in your meeting. She spoke for 4 minutes. Ward counted. She told them what she was. Not the title, they knew the title. She told them what it meant to be the last of something, and to have watched other species make the same decision the Keth delegate was proposing right now, and to have watched what it cost them. Not in lives. In what they became after. She said she had lived for 200 years, and she had chosen to tether to a human for the first time in all of that, because she watched him fix a seal in a broken airlock for 40 people who did not know his name. Because she decided that kind of person was worth her rule. I have one rule, she said. My human does not get left. Not by me. Not by anyone who wants to call themselves civilized. She looked at the map. At the line drawn through 4 colonies. That line goes through his family. And through 1.2 million other people who have families. So I am asking, not as a symbol, not as an ancient legal instrument, but as a person who has earned the right to ask, are you certain this is who you want to be? Silence lasted a long time. Bryn Adeyemi had been transferred to the human delegation after Tren Hull Station. She leaned forward and said, in the voice of someone who had been waiting for the right moment, motion to table the buffer zone proposal. Nobody seconded it for 6 full seconds. Then Shom, present as a translation consultant, said quietly, seconded. It was tabled. The meeting went on for 3 more hours after that, and they didn't solve anything that day. But the line came off the map. Walking back through the ship's lower corridor afterward, Ward told Syria she didn't have to do that. She landed back on his shoulder from the corridor rail. You would have sat there, she said, and said your one sentence, and then gone back to the ship and called your sister and not slept for a week. He was quiet. Yeah. I have a rule, she said. Her voice was matter of fact. You don't leave. I don't leave. That is the whole rule. He thought about arguing. He had tried arguing with her before about various things. He had a record of 0 wins in the category of things that mattered. Okay, he said. Good, she said, and tucked her head briefly against his cheek in the way she did sometimes when she thought he needed it and wasn't going to say so. He didn't say anything either. He just walked, and she rode, and neither of them left. Nobody called it the unwritten because the name was poetic. They called it that because the leading theory, the one the Accord's senior researchers spoke about in careful, private language, was that it had once been a war. A very old war, between species so old that nothing of them remained except what the war had left behind. A self-spreading nothing that consumed matter, energy, light, and information, and turned all of it into the same flat, white silence. It did not attack. It expanded. And now it had reached Arden's fall. Ward was running atmospheric processors for the evacuation fleet when the math turned bad. Arden's fall had a population of 80,000. The fleet had 12 transport vessels and not enough time. The Resolute was one of the smaller ships in the formation, not built for large-scale evacuation, repurposed, and struggling. Ward was in the atmospheric control bay keeping breathable air moving through 4 overloaded transports that had docked directly to the Resolute's secondary hull. Syria was in the bay with him, doing something nobody had planned for. It turned out she spoke 17 languages. 3 of them were languages the Accord's translation systems could not parse. Fringe species dialects, extinct or near extinct, spoken by people who lived at the edges of charted space and had never quite made it onto the main Accord registry. She sat beside the communications array and talked to people who had been cut off from the evacuation guidance, who could not understand the standard emergency broadcast, who were panicking in languages the computers could not reach. She talked them through it, one family at a time. Ward did not have time to watch. He heard her voice, steady and unhurried, cycling through languages he could not name, and kept his hands on the atmospheric controls. Then the fleet admiral ordered retreat. The unwritten had reached the outer gravity well. It was not fast. It did not need to be fast. It moved the way a tide moved, inevitable, patient, unbothered by anything the fleet was doing. 2 transports had already cleared the well. 3 more were in transit. 1 was not. Transport 7 had a failed primary thruster. It was loaded with 20,000 people, and it was drifting. The fleet pulled back. The admiral's voice on the channel was not cruel. She sounded like someone doing the hardest math she had ever done, out loud, in front of everyone. The calculus was not survivable for the ships that stayed. Ward closed the atmospheric bay door and started walking toward the EVA locker. He did not announce this. He did not ask permission. Captain Osei's voice came over his earpiece 2 minutes later, sharp and careful. Ward, what are you doing? It was not a question. The transport has a failed thruster coupling on the port side, he said, pulling his suit from the locker. I have the coupling in my toolkit. I've replaced that exact fitting 14 times on ships this class. A pause. Ward, I'll be fast, he said. He was halfway into his suit when the EVA bay inner door opened and Syria walked in. He stopped. She looked at him. He said, no. She said, the rule. You're not built for hard vacuum. You're a dragon. You breathe atmosphere. I also, she said, stepping past him to the outer door controls, generate significant thermal output when I choose to. She looked at him over her shoulder. You will need a welded connection. Your tools will not be fast enough. My output will be. She held his gaze. Ward, the rule. He did not have time to argue. He sealed his helmet and opened the door. Space was quiet in the specific way that nothing is quiet. The unwritten was visible at the edge of the gravity well, not dark, but white. Flat, total white, spreading slowly like frost across glass. It was the most frightening thing Ward had ever seen, and it made no sound at all. The thruster coupling was exactly where he expected it, cracked along the primary seal. He got his hands on it in 90 seconds. The replacement took 2 minutes. The weld, the part that needed to hold under full burn, the part his magnetic seal driver could not set fast enough, took 4 seconds when Syria pressed her body against the joint and released what she had been holding. The heat was controlled. Precise. She knew exactly how much to give. The thruster fired. Ward grabbed the nearest handhold. Transport 7 moved. They made it clear of the gravity well with 40 seconds before the unwritten reached that point in space. 40 seconds is not much. It was enough. Getting back to the Resolute took 12 minutes. Syria barely made it through the inner door before her legs gave out. She was conscious. Ward grabbed her before she hit the floor and she told him, in a voice that was absolutely furious and slightly unsteady, that what he had just done was the single most unreasonable thing she had witnessed in 200 years of living. He said, you followed me. She said, that is the rule. And then she let him carry her to the med bay, which she would later claim she allowed purely out of practical necessity. The ship's doctor, Pell, was a quiet man who had stopped being surprised by most things. He looked at Syria. He ran his scans. He told Ward that her recovery was unlike anything in the medical literature and appeared to accelerate when Ward was in the room. Ward said he didn't know what to do with that information. Pell said, you don't have to do anything with it. Just stay. Ward stayed. He sat in the chair beside her, still in his EVA suit with the helmet off, and did not go anywhere. Syria's breathing steadied. The faint gold light came back slowly, like a lantern warming up after a long cold. Outside, the unwritten held its new edge. Stable. Patient. Waiting. It was not done. Neither were they. The footage spread the way footage always spread, instantly and everywhere, accompanied by opinions. Someone on the escort fleet had a hull camera running during the Arden's fall evacuation. It had captured the full sequence. A figure in an EVA suit pushing off from the Resolute, a golden-green shape moving beside him through hard vacuum. The moment she pressed her body against a thruster coupling and lit up like a controlled star. The footage was 22 seconds long. It had been viewed, by the time Ward heard about it, more times than there were humans alive. The Accord was processing it. That was how Bryn described it when she came aboard 3 weeks after Arden's fall. The Accord is processing it. In the tone of someone who had been in a lot of meetings where nobody knew what to do with a thing and were refusing to admit it. Humanity, Ward noticed, had gone a different direction. Someone was selling small golden green dragon figurines at the Accord's transit stations. Captain Osei had found one in the ship's mess and put it on the shelf above the coffee dispenser without comment. Syria had recovered. She was moving carefully, eating more than usual, and had resumed her shoulder position with the determination of someone reasserting a constitutional right. She had not mentioned the hard vacuum again. Neither had Ward. Some things sat between people, and apparently between people and their dragons, without needing to be discussed. Bryn came with a proposition from the Accord's Senior Research Division. Ward read it in the map room while Syria listened from the table. The unwritten consumed information. That was the mechanism. It did not destroy matter in the conventional sense. It erased the structure that made matter meaningful. The only reason the anchoring proposal existed at all was because of records found in a derelict Dracovar archive station. References to something called the anchor notation, a method of encoding inhabited worlds in a resonance pattern that the unwritten could not process. Nobody had been able to read the notation. It was in Old Dracovar, a written language that had not been used in 200 years, which required bridging into a chord mathematical notation to be practically useful. Syria could read Old Dracovar. She was, as far as anyone could establish, the only living being who could. And Ward, who had spent his career maintaining systems built by 14 different species using 11 different engineering notation systems, because nobody in the galaxy had ever agreed on a standard, and he had learned to read whatever the pipes were labeled in, could read a chord mathematical notation in his sleep. Bryn set down the proposal. She said, "Nobody planned this. But it's you too." They started the translation the next day. It was slow. Old Dracovar had no direct equivalent for several core mathematical concepts. Syria would read a passage aloud, and Ward would map it, and they would argue about it. And Syria would insist she was correct, and Ward would show her the engineering logic, and she would consider it for a long moment with the specific expression she wore when she was about to admit something, which looked from the outside like a very dignified kind of stubbornness. They argued about 17 glyphs over 8 days. They were right about 14 of them, wrong about 3. Syria considered this acceptable. Ward did not consider it acceptable. This was, he had learned, a fundamental difference between them and not one that was going to resolve. On the 6th night, working late in the map room, Syria stopped mid-sentence and was quiet for a moment. "I should tell you something," she said. Ward looked up. "I was the last egg on my world," she said. "My parents did not survive the end. Someone put me in a cryo vault on the last Dracovar ship. I do not know who. I never knew who." She was looking at the notation on the screen, not at him. "I woke up alone, in a derelict station, 200 years later. No world. No people. Nothing that could read my name. I spent 6 years living in ship walls before I found you." Ward was quiet. "Why me?" he said. Not a challenge. Just a question he had never asked directly. She looked at him then. "Because I watched you for 11 days before I let you see me. And in those 11 days you fixed things that did not need fixing, in airlocks that no one would check, for people who would never look up and wonder who kept them safe." She paused. "I had been awake for 6 years. I had watched a lot of people. You were the first one I was not afraid to choose. A beat. So I chose." Ward did not know what to say to that. He looked at the notation on the screen for a moment. Then he went back to work. The translation was completed on the 8th day. It was not a weapon. It was a shield, an encoding method that could be applied to an inhabited world's gravitational and electromagnetic signature, making it unreadable to the unwritten's expansion mechanism. But applying it required one specific thing: Dracovar bioelectric resonance. A living Dracovar had to be present at each world and perform the anchoring. No machine could replicate it. No other species could substitute. There was one Dracovar alive. Syria read the last page without expression. Then she sat very still for a long time. Ward waited. He had learned to wait. "I know what they are going to ask," she said. "You don't have to say yes." "I know." She looked at him. Her voice was steady in the particular way it was steady when she had already decided something and was choosing how to deliver it. "If I do this, if I go to each threatened world, it will take years. I will have to travel to places the Resolute cannot follow. I will be away from you." The map room was very quiet. "The rule," Ward said. "Yes," she said. "The rule becomes harder." She held his gaze. "But it does not change." He didn't argue. He understood, by now, that the rule was not about location. It was not about always being in the same room. It was about something she had decided the day she had climbed out of his hull panel and looked at him with violet eyes, that she was not leaving, and neither was he, and that was simply what was true, wherever either of them went. "When do we start?" he said. And her scales lit up, quiet in gold. "We already have 19 worlds in 11 months. The Resolute had logged more jump hours in that period than in the previous 6 years of service combined. The crew had not been reassigned. Captain Osei had filed a formal protest when the Accord suggested it, and the protest had been granted on grounds nobody had quite expected. The ship's crew had become, in the quiet administrative language of the Accord, operationally essential to the Dracovar anchoring program, which meant they were essential to Syria, which meant they were not going anywhere. Ward had watched 19 anchor points go into the cores of 19 worlds. Each one took Syria 4 to 6 hours, a process that looked, from the outside, like a golden-green light settling into the rock and air of a place until the place seemed to breathe differently. Each time, Ward sat nearby and did not leave. The math on that, which he had not run himself but which Pell had quietly shown him one evening, suggested that Syria's output during anchoring was measurably stronger when Ward was within 50 meters. Nobody had a theory for why. Everyone had stopped requiring a theory. The unwritten had slowed. Not stopped. Slowed. And then the Accord's research team found the origin point. Bryn brought it to Ward in the map room, not to the full briefing. He understood why when he read the energy models. Anchoring the origin point would collapse the unwritten's propagation structure. The 19 anchor points would catch the collapse and redirect it into stable decay. The unwritten would not disappear. Nothing that old ever fully disappeared, but it would shrink to a fixed point and stop spreading. Forever, or close enough to forever that the difference did not matter in any human lifetime. The problem was the energy requirement. Anchoring one world cost Syria significantly. Anchoring the origin point, the source, the place where the old war had burned itself into a permanent wound in space, required an output that was not survivable for a single Dracovar working alone. The Accord high table. Oh, say, me. Then it stays here until I talk to her. When he told Syria, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I know. Of course she knew. He looked at her. How long? 3 months. Since I ran the secondary energy models. She met his eyes without flinching. I did not tell you because you would have spent 3 months trying to find another answer, and I wanted you to have 3 more months. He sat with that for a while. Did you find another answer? Yes, she said. That is why I let you tell me now. She had found it in the last page of the anchor notation, a secondary passage she had not included in the original translation because she had not understood it until she went back through the full original text on her own. A resonance amplifier. It did not require more Dracovar. It required a second energy source, listed in the ancient text as something Ward's translation rendered as the warmth signature of a tethered bond. Nobody had known what that meant. Syria had known for 3 months. It meant Ward, physically present, at the origin point. The bond between a Dracovar and their chosen person generated a continuous field, low-level, invisible, the kind of thing that didn't show up in standard scans, but was measurable if you knew what you were looking for. And under the right conditions, focused the right way, it was enough to double her output. Enough to make the impossible thing survivable. She needed him there, in the unwritten, at the end of everything. Ward said, This is the most unreasonable thing I have ever heard. She said, What was the second most unreasonable? He said, You following me into a vacuum. She said, Did it work? He didn't answer. She said, Then. The fleet assembled. 7 ships to hold the perimeter. 1 small shuttle for Ward and Syria. The origin point was a dead star system at the galaxy's outer arm. Dark, quiet, ancient in the way that things are ancient when they have outlasted everything that ever named them. The unwritten at its heart was not like it was at its edges. At the edges it was a slow white tide. Here it was everything. Every direction. A flat, absolute white that pressed against the shuttle's hull sensors and returned nothing. Ward held on to Syria, and she began. He could not describe it well, afterward. She glowed. Not gold, not the warm lamp light she wore in comfort, but something older and deeper and brighter than anything her scales had shown before. He felt the bond the way he had never felt it consciously, like a wire drawn taut between them, and he understood without words that she was using it, drawing through it, and he let her. He held on. He did not let go. It lasted 6 minutes. The unwritten collapsed from the origin outward, caught by 19 anchor points in succession, redirected, and stilled. The Dead Star system held the last of it like a closed fist. The white disappeared. The stars came back. The shuttle lost power in the collapse and drifted. They waited 4 hours for pickup. Syria was exhausted in a way Ward had not seen, barely glowing, wings flat, still conscious, propped against him in the dark shuttle with her head tucked under her chin. She told him he smelled like fear and machine oil. He said those were his two settings. She made the sound that was close to a laugh. He had heard it enough times now that it never failed to loosen something in his chest. Pickup came. They were brought aboard the Resolute. The crew said nothing because some moments are too large for talking. Hell checked Syria. She was recovering. Bryn read Ward the Accord communique in the med bay, all 12 paragraphs of it. Full member status for humanity. No more provisional designation, no more 2 seats in the back of the room. And the Dracovar, represented by their sole living person, formally recognized as a living species under permanent Accord protection. Not a relic, not a symbol, a people. Ward stared at the ceiling for a while. I'm still the pipe fixer, he said. That's still what I am. Bryn said, you're the pipe fixer who just saved the galaxy. Ward looked at Syria, asleep, one wing draped over his arm with the easy ownership of something that had claimed him a long time ago and never once doubted the decision. With my dragon, he said, from the bed, without opening her eyes. Your dragon who saved you first. He didn't argue. He never argued the things that mattered. She had one rule. She kept it, in crawl spaces and council chambers, in hard vacuum and the white nothing at the edge of the universe. She did not leave her human alone. And because she didn't, neither did he. Not the 40 people whose names he never learned. Not 1.2 million who were never made into a calculation. Not 19 worlds with new anchors in their cores. Not the last dragon, who had been alone for 200 years and had chosen not to be. Never leave your human alone. Not even when the galaxy falls. The rule held.